Hi, Erica. Thank you for being here with us today. I'm so glad to have you.
Well, thank you, Meg. I know we were already chatting, and I feel like we are going to have such an incredible conversation today.
I know. I know. And you know what? The pelvic floor is something I think that so many women struggle with or have issues that they might either not know that it is even related to their pelvic floor or they don't know what to do about it. So I'm so excited to do some myth busting, some guides, and all sorts of things. But before we get started, could you just tell us a little bit about like how you kind of got into where you are today?
Yeah, so my story goes way back. Like it actually started, so at the age of 5, I started experiencing, pretty decent knee pain. And it just continued on for year after year. And the doctors kept saying it was growing pains. Well, fast forward to about the time I was about 17, and I had stopped growing like 3 years prior to that. So my mom finally took me up to the Mayo Clinic up in Rochester, Minnesota, to see a specialist to be like, okay, we can't figure out why she's still having this knee pain because I never got the opportunity to really be a good athlete because I'd always be injured halfway through, so much inflammatory pain, things like that. And so this was the piece that catapulted me into the exercise science route that I ended up going. And basically, what they said to me is they said, you need to strengthen your legs. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, I've suffered in pain for the last, 12 years, most of my childhood. Grew up on way too much Motrin, which we know, is not good for you and good for your stomach and gut and all of that. And so that's what catapulted me to get into the gym and started lifting weights. Actually learned how to do Olympic lifting the correct way with good form. It was really like taught to me that way right away. So I was very blessed in that way. And then I went on to study exercise science in college. Basically, really started to. I was just so fascinated with like, okay, how could I heal my body? How could I get rid of pain with movement? And so by the time I was 21, basically about graduating college, my knee pain was gone. So it did take a bit to rehabilitate for sure. But through that, my own experience as well as in starting to work with clients, I really started to see at a really pretty young age how movement can really heal our body, the power that there is. So then I discovered Pilates and went down that deep rabbit hole, took all the training. I was like, it was a whole nother degree of, learning Pilates. And then from there, really started working more with like, well, I always had an interest in prenatal fitness, even in college. And the reason why this matters, even for women who maybe aren't even moms, or it's been a long time since you've had a baby, is that it taught me so much about our body that we otherwise don't understand. And so when you can understand how the female body really is to work, because we're designed to grow and have babies, whether we do or don't, I started discovering so much about our deep core, our pelvic floor. I didn't learn in college what the pelvic floor was. I didn't learn about fascia. And those are two big things that I now teach women today. They're fundamentals of everything that I talk about. They really started discovering and looking at things outside the box, outside of quote, fitness, and really started realizing we are missing this in our movement practice. We are missing this in fitness. And that's what really catapulted me to just create the programming that I've created to continue to just really help women prepare their bodies, whether we're talking about, preparing for childbirth, rehabilitating after, or just getting women out of pain, regardless of, ever having babies or not, because so many women at such a young age deal with aches and pains. And in my perspective, most of them are preventable and most of them are reversible. So that's really the piece that catapulted me to do what I do today.
Wonderful. Well, I'm so excited to dive in and give some tangible tips of what people can actually do. So let's start by talking a little bit about your deep core and what your deep core actually is.
Yeah, so I love this question and I love answering it because so many times we think the word core and we just think about our abdominals, like the rectus abdominals, maybe our obliques, which we're taught a lot, and that six-pack muscles, things like that. Well, our core actually is so much more than that. And I have the word deep core on there because it gets people thinking, oh, I have a deep core. What's my deep core? And it really is from the base of your pelvis, which is where your pelvic floor is, and everything through your torso, basically up to your diaphragm, which sits at kind of the base of your rib cage, your intercostals, which are the muscles that go in between your rib cage, all the way up basically to your shoulders. So it's really everything inside your entire torso. And we don't realize, again, because we're not taught this, and especially even if we're taught anatomy and we learn muscles, we just learn, oh, pelvic floor, we learn the, again, the abdominal muscles, the
Hmm.
back muscles, diaphragm, things like that. But we also have to understand we have this amazingness in our body called fascia, which is what really helps connect everything together. Just really briefly, so everyone understands and can maybe help to start to visualize
Yeah, I'd
this.
like
So,
that explanation because I think fascia can be
yeah,
confusing.
it is. So, fascia, really think of it as connecting everything together. It wraps around all of our organs, it wraps around every single muscle of our body and every single muscle spindle. So, our muscles are all made up of these muscle spindles, all the little muscle fibers, right? So, all of those are wrapped in fascia. Our nerves are all wrapped in fascia. If you were to take off the outer layer of like a fascia of your whole body, it would be the entire outline from your forehead to your fingertips to your toes. And so when we start to visualize like, oh gosh, we do have all this fascia, we can manipulate fascia, we can improve the function of fascia, we can create better fascia of our body on some simple things we'll talk about today, just honestly through improving our movement and understanding of the body. The other piece that, because I know we're going to talk about pelvic floor today, that I want everyone to start to visualize is the base of our deep core is the pelvic floor, right? So the muscle. And a lot of times we talk about just the pelvic floor and the musculature of it. And that's great. But I want you all to visualize that you have these layers of fascia above your pelvic floor. So above the pelvic floor, we obviously have our organs. Well, around our organs and in between to support our organs underneath, we also have fascia there. And so when we start to realize it's not just void space, there's actually fascia. And so this is where I really want to get women to understand that there is so much healing potential in your body, even if you've dealt with aches and pains or pelvic floor dysfunction, or may not even know you have pelvic floor dysfunction, but that is a part of what can be contributing to back pain, neck pain, knee pain, hip pain, you name it. It all connects back in one way or another to our pelvic floor, whether it's our pelvic floor, that's like the root part of it or not, it's a piece of it. So does that help give that
Yeah.
big
And
long
so
explanation?
would you deal with helping fascia? So can we dive, and this is like a little bit of a divergence, so maybe we were going to
Yeah.
get into this later, but the difference of sort of when you would be healing muscle versus how you would heal fascia.
Okay. So in a sense, they are intertwined and connected. Can you fully do one without the other? No.
Yeah.
Can we
Mhm.
focus more on training for our muscular system versus our fascial system? Yes, that we can do. So a good example is just going and lifting really heavy. That's going to tap into our muscular system more so than, say, like yoga, Pilates, dance, where we're really focused on elongating the body, band work, spring work, things like that. That's going to be a little bit more fascial related. Now, are you strengthening your muscles when you're strengthening and working in a more fascially focused way? Absolutely.
Mhm.
But if we're just focused on like the heavier lifting and strengthening the muscles, we are also, yes, going to strengthen fascia, but not in a connected way as much. And so, Meg, here's an example. So, everyone listening to Meg, you and I on video, we can do this. Is put your arms out.
Yes.
This is
Okay.
a good example. So, we just put our arms out and we're just reaching our arms long. And I'll scoot to the side. So, if anyone's watching, you can see my fingers. So, if I just hold my arm out like this, I
Mhm.
feel my shoulder working. And I'm like, okay. And so, if you already have neck pain and you're just holding your arm like this, that
Mhm.
shoulder is going to start to fatigue and you might even start to get neck pain from that. Now, what if I reach from underneath my armpit and I reach long through my fingertips, like almost like I want to get some space in that
Yeah.
shoulder capsule? Now I'm going to actually start to feel more wrapping around my shoulder blade.
Mhm.
I feel maybe even a stretch if you're tight in your bicep or your forearm, but now I'm taking that stress out of my neck because I've got more space
Mhm.
and I'm actually activating more support. So I'm actually starting to activate more muscles, but in a fascial way,
Okay.
if
It
that
actually
makes sense.
feels
So
better. And for me, I mean,
yeah, it
but it
does
feels better
exactly.
whenever I put that support there. I didn't even, you don't, I
Yeah.
never even I thought of that.
Hmm. So that's kind of a good visual. So
Mhm.
I am a huge fan of weightlifting. And I think, especially for women, we need to do weightlifting, but it's called a balance, right? It's like, but
Mhm.
when you learn to be more fascially connected through your body, we start to understand more about our deep core and our pelvic floor. Then when you do more fascial type movement, And then you also take those techniques into your weight training. It makes your weight training more effective and
Hmm.
more, we become more stable in our body. We have more space between our bones. So a lot of pain is because we just get impingement in
Hmm.
our between our bones, and it's not a structural. So many times, and Meg, feel free to pull me back if I'm going
Yeah.
way off
No, I
track
love
here. But
it.
this is really interesting because I think so many times with pain, we think we're told, oh, it's a structural issue. And I've worked with thousands of people. I've had thousands of women go through my core rehab program, and it's rarely ever structural. It is that's a very outlier. I don't see it in my
Hmm.
practice. What I see is we're lacking space. We're lacking that stability of our fascial system. And you could say muscular system as well, because of course they're intertwined. And we just don't have enough space between our bones. So as women get older, they're like, oh, well, it's normal to have this pain or that pain. It's normal to be a little more kyphotic, that rounded kind of older woman, posture that so many women get. And it's actually happening a lot younger. I see it in teens now because of all the phones
All
and
the
computers and
forward
stuff we're
facing.
on, all
Mhm.
the forward motion. But we can train the body out of that. Just like we train the body into it, we can train the body out of it and help to get our body out of pain.
Hmm. Yes. Okay. So that is great. Those are good things to know because I think it is when people hear the word fascia or you're like, okay, how does that fit in? I think that it's interesting that you're saying that
Yeah.
because another thing I work with is like cortisol, adrenal fatigue.
Mhm.
Sometimes when you're doing the
Yep.
heavy lifting, while lifting is great, building muscle is great, when you're doing some of these exercises the way you're saying it with more like stretching and maybe lighter in a more structurally optimal way, you're getting less, also sometimes less stress on your adrenals too, which can be a
Yeah.
whole nother, that's a whole nother topic, but
That is to say,
yes.
yeah, Meg, I was gonna say just real quick on that is I can't tell you the amount of women over the years that I've actually got them to decrease their exercise and
Hmm.
shift gears. And it's hard. It's a mental shift that we talk
Yes.
about because so many women think I got to go hard or I got to be sweating my butt off and I got to be sore for that workout to have been effective. And that's actually not the case. And so to your point, we just have to start to shift gears and our body actually can start to feel so much better, not only from a physical perspective, but the cortisol, adrenal, HPA access piece when we stop beating our body up so much. And so it's a balance, and every woman, is different in her stage of life. And there
Mhm.
might be a period of time where you can handle a little bit harder exercise, and then there's a period of time where you're like, you can't. And if you're fight or flight, or if you're in fight or flight all the time, that high intensity exercise is just adding to it.
Yes. And it's hard for
Yeah.
people to understand that because it's a release for people. It's positive in a lot of ways, but when your body's not in that place where it can handle the stress, it can do do things. So I agree. I'm sometimes telling people to cut back and they're like, wait, I don't understand this. And so we have to go
Yeah,
into
exactly.
why because it's true. Yeah. So another thing that you mentioned that I think is a big misnomer for people is that Kegels, because we're told to do Kegels. You get that like, okay, you should have after you have a baby, start the Kegels when you're at I heard when you're at a stop, every time you're at a stoplight, sit here and do Kegels. And so,
Yeah.
like that's a way to remember to do them, but you're saying to stop doing them. So let's talk about why and what to replace.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So here's the issue that I've discovered with women doing Kegels. Now, again, there's always outliers. There always will be women that say, well, Kegels really helped me, with whatever was going on, pelvic, incontinence or whatever. That's great. But then I will still encourage those women to still understand and listen to this because it may only help them temporarily.
Okay.
Because what I've noticed that women that do a lot of Kegels is that their pelvic floor is actually too restricted. It's too tight or imbalanced. And so what can happen with that is we're taught with Kegels to just squeeze the pelvic floor, right? Stop that
Mhm.
flow of urine. Which one? Don't do that, ladies, because again, if you are stopping that flow of urine stream while you're going pee, it can lead to backup of bacteria in the bladder, which can lead to UTIs, which Meg and I both know is not good for
Yeah.
anybody. And so we don't want that, but it also can train the muscles to not fully release and relax. And that's also can lead to UTIs and spastic bladders and like all that kind of stuff because of the musculature being actually too restricted. The other piece of that is with Kegels, most women are only working the front part of their pelvic floor. So they think like, oh, stop the flow of urine. That's only going to activate the front portion of your pelvic floor. So it leads to an imbalanced pelvic floor. It leads to really too much tightness. I can't tell you, the first thing I teach my ladies is how to release and relax their pelvic floor. And a lot of women are like, wait, I gotta relax my pelvic floor. I'm like, yes, we have to relax the pelvic floor in order for us to find how to properly activate our pelvic floor. So the issue with the Kegels, right? You're only strengthening kind of the front part. You might only be strengthening one side or the other. We also have to look at what's going on with your pelvis and your legs, because the pelvic floor, well, I feel like it's been so taught like it's a standalone muscle. It's our pelvic floor. We just squeeze our pelvic floor and we're going to be fine. That is BS. Because I will tell you this, that your hips matter. And so a lot of women, we think about our hips, our pelvis, it's all held together by fascia.
Mhm.
And so most of us have tendencies towards, one of our hips to be a little bit shifted or inward or up or you name it, which can pull on the other one. And that also can affect our pelvic floor function. This is where I see women that just focus on pelvic floor. They might even go to pelvic floor PT and they can still get stuck because we're just looking at the pelvic floor and we're missing what's going on with the pelvis and our leg balance and our glutes and the deep core. We already talked about the deep core function. Then that's where women can get stuck with the pelvic floor. Now, there's great pelvic floor physical therapists out there. I always encourage women to go do that because having that tactile feedback, but also don't be shy to go change PTs if you're like not jiving with that one, or they're just addressing your pelvic floor and they're not looking at your overall alignment and especially what's going on with your pelvis. You have to look at the balance in the pelvis. So that's really why Kegels, I find, don't really do what they want us to do. The other piece we have to understand, I've already talked about deep core, but for optimal pelvic floor function, ladies, we have to have optimal breathing. Most of us are breathing really, really shallow. So right now, I want everyone
Yes.
listening to this. You can do this. No, you're breathing regardless, right? So I want you to just breathe in and notice where your breath goes. Do you notice your breath, your shoulders kind of coming up towards your ears? You might even be rounding forward a little bit, stuff like that. If you feel that breath just in the upper chest, upper back, shoulders rise a little bit, I can tell you we don't have optimal pelvic floor function. You cannot have optimal pelvic floor function when you have that type of breath. Now, we can mention belly breathing here because I have a lot of people that are like, well, but I've been taught to belly breathe. Is belly breathing good for pelvic floor? It's not bad, but it's still not necessarily what we want for optimal deep core. And when I say deep core, I'm also including pelvic floor. This is where we have to start to shift our perspective on pelvic floor and not just think of our pelvic floor as a standalone muscle. Yes, it works on its own, but only to a degree. We have to look at and think of our deep core as a whole. That is what's going to get our pelvic floor to work optimally. And we want optimal. We don't want too tight of a pelvic floor. We don't want too weak of a pelvic floor. We want a balanced, optimal, functioning pelvic floor, which means we've got to improve our breathing and improve how our entire deep core functions. So the breath piece of this, it's so important and it is challenging. I'm not going to lie. It's just because we've got to retrain our brain and our entire body how to breathe. And that is, we want our breath going down out to our ribs and into our back. So we're actually going to activate our diaphragm more, and our diaphragm works in conjunction with our pelvic floor. And a lot of people are really restricted in their diaphragm. And belly breathing, while it can get your diaphragm to open up a little bit more, it's still not optimal, like breathing down and out into your ribs and into your back. And so you just have to start starting to visualize that. And a good practice to do to start to improve your breathing into your back is to actually lay on your stomach and start to visualize. I'm a big fan of visualization, ladies. Like, visualization is super helpful. So even if your body can't do it yet, you still want to visualize yourself going there and it will happen faster. There's actually research out there that backs that methodology up. And I see it all the time when I have my clients and my members that are like, Erica, I don't feel this. And I'm like, okay, well, when we tend to want to try to force something, we're like, oh, we don't feel it because it's so new to our body tenses up and goes into fight or flight even more. And that's the opposite of what we want to try to find that optimal pelvic floor function. So laying on your stomach, just visualizing, breathing through your nose and your breath going all the way down into your low back. You may not get it the first dozen times you practice, but maybe it's the 20th time. All of a sudden you're like, okay, I start to feel something new and open up the back a little bit more. So when we can expand our breath, start to unlock our diaphragm, that can then help us to actually learn to stimulate our pelvic floor more correctly. And we have to get out of that squeeze, squeeze, squeeze idea. We should not be hardly squeeze. We shouldn't be like squeezing and gripping our pelvic floor. We want to think of our pelvic floor. Initially, we want to soften our pelvic floor, right? So we have to learn how to release and relax. And then we have to think about gently activating our pelvic floor. So it's a very gentle. We actually initiate pelvic floor activation with breath, with that exhale. So if we don't know how to inhale very deep, it's going to be really hard for us to use the exhale to activate our pelvic floor. And this is where, again, I'm a huge fan of like obviously the movement practice, moving your body, but and that can be helpful, but ultimately we want to get to where we can actually use our breath. So just Meg, you and I sitting here, we could use our exhale to gently draw our pelvic floor together all the way up through the top of our head. So it's visualizing this full connection of the fascia and the muscular system all connecting as one, instead of sitting here and just squeezing the pelvic floor. Because you can just squeeze the pelvic floor, and there's not that that's a bad thing to do from time to time. But for optimal function, we want to think about releasing and relaxing, and then going in and connecting lightly and lifting all the way up. And a piece that I'll just cue for women listening is when you go to activate your pelvic floor, we have to think about it. I always say do it as like a diamond shape, because your pelvic floor runs from your pubic bone all the way back to your tailbone. And so if you notice, and I should say sits bones to sits bones. So if you notice on your exhale and trying to activate your pelvic floor, you clench your glutes and tuck your pelvis, you're not actually activating your pelvic floor. You're probably grippy and grabby in your pelvic floor muscles, and you're cheating with your glutes. And that is eye-opening to a lot of women. So we got to get out of that butt tucking and butt gripping, or I should say, pelvis tucking and glute gripping patterns if we're ever going to work on optimal pelvic floor function. So that's a lot of information, I
Yeah,
know,
no, that's
but
wonderful. Yeah. Is there any way you should be sitting when you're doing this? Like, is there an optimal way to be positioned?
yeah, so I mean, like right now, just sitting, like I'm sitting on a flat stool, or you could sit sometimes an exercise ball or put a little pillow underneath your pelvic floor so you can feel tactile feed. Tactile feedback can be really, really helpful for our body. And so just sitting here, like feeling you're relaxing into that pillow or that bench or the ball that you're sitting onto. We're not pushing downward. That's a key thing. We're never pushing, we're widening through the pelvis.
Okay.
And then we want to think about gently drawing up. Gentle is the key word. So if women notice like, oh, they grip and tuck, okay, we got to let go
Mhm.
of the glutes. And again, in the beginning, you may not feel anything happening, but that's
Mhm.
the natural progression. We have to get into the space of feeling nothing to actually get to feeling something,
Yes.
because it's a whole new way of thinking about our body that we've never been taught. We just haven't been
Mhm.
taught this stuff as women, you know? So,
I know, yeah, or taught wrong. And like you're saying, like,
yes,
okay, we were saying, like, okay, sit there,
yeah,
do the other
yeah.
thing. This is a weird question, but I also was told that whenever you do, you should never, you should like do your Kegels at the stoplight, but also don't do the Kegels if you have a full bladder. It does your is this something you should do after you've emptied your bladder, or does that not make a difference?
That shouldn't make a difference. Like, because
Okay.
the thing you want to think about is like basically what way I teach is I teach women how to connect. I call it connecting through their body. You're connecting lightly through your deep core. Then we're going to do any of our movements, right? We have a lot of women who, like they pee a little when they sneeze
Hmm.
or cough or laugh. So you want to lightly connect before you feel that laugh or cough or sneeze coming on.
Hmm.
And if your bladder is fuller, well, you're going to have to like, you want to make sure your your pelvic floor is lightly connected too. And of course, go pee and then
Hmm.
come back and work on reconnecting through your core. But yeah, it's like I teach all of this with movement, but when we can start to understand all the pieces that are happening and how things are supposed to work a little bit, even if you just start thinking about it, that's can really start to move you in the right direction.
Direction. Oh, and do you feel that
Yeah.
people that have, because a lot of women have incontinence. It's
Hmm.
really common, especially after childbirth. Do you feel like people
Yeah.
can help heal that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
I actually find incontinence, I say incontinence is the body saying, hello, pay attention to me down here, pelvic floor. And I always tell women that if you have incontinence, it is like we need to start doing something about it now so it doesn't get worse and it doesn't lead to pelvic organ prolapse, which most women actually are not familiar with. At least that's what I hear. Women
Yes.
don't realize that their organs can start to slide out down through the vaginal opening. And so if we've got incontinence, that's already an indication that something's imbalanced in our pelvic floor, whether we're too tight, too weak, imbalanced, whatever it is, something. And again, maybe within the pelvis too, maybe within our breathing patterns, all of those things. So we need to start working on that so we can prevent worsening of pelvic floor issues. And like back pain is a common, can indicate pelvic floor dysfunction. You don't have to have incontinence or anything, quote, going on with your pelvic floor right now to have pelvic floor dysfunction. If we have back pain or heck, even neck pain, knee pain, things like that, those all can indicate there's something going on with our pelvic floor. And again, it may not be, our pelvic floor may not be the only piece. It never is just one thing. It's looking at all the pieces together and rebalancing our body to help
Mhm.
get us out of dysfunction or
Right.
prevention of
Yeah.
dysfunction.
And when I was sitting here
Yeah.
doing like following your directions, I actually felt when you said breathe in, I felt it kind of pulled me up the whole way through my entire deep core. Like I felt like, oh, okay, kind of
Yeah,
pulled you up into more of that posture that we should be kind of sitting in
exactly.
anyway, too.
Yeah, exactly. It does. And when you connect it together, then you're kind of deep, you're tapping into the deep layers of along the spine. And so that's where it can really help to strengthen your back. So there's that connection with directly with strengthening our pelvic floor and our spinal health when we learn how to improve our breathing and do that light connection that I was just sharing.
Yeah, yes. Okay, so everyone, I always tell people with breath work, you can take 2 minutes out of your day to do it. So if you start, do you have any recommendations of like how often people should be doing this?
I mean, I would practice it every day.
Mhm.
And then, of course, if you're going to work out, do it. And like I have a free pelvic floor guide, which more information in it will send you to a couple of videos with some movement. Because sometimes just doing nothing is very hard for women to start to figure it out. So when I can get you doing a little bit of pelvic tilt type movement, hip rolls, things like that, it can start to wake up the deeper layers a little bit easier. So
Okay.
when we can do some gentle movement, and I do it every day,
Mhm.
you can do it again while you're driving. If you want to do the stoplight thing, fine, but don't just do the Kegel part of it. We
Yeah.
want to connect fully. And it really is if you start paying more attention to your posture, you'll naturally be waking up your pelvic floor a little bit more. But we want to make sure we're not in grippy grabby patterns. That tucked pelvis is a really good one. So anyone listening, if you notice yourself like really squeezing those
Doing.
glutes and tucking your pelvis, which is a really, really common posture after having babies, even if it's been
Mhm.
30 years. So
Yes.
it
Oh,
stays. I
even
see
long
it.
term after having
Oh,
babies.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yep, because the postural shifts happen during pregnancy. And if no one's ever brought attention to it, we get that tucked butt. So, like kind of the flat butt. How many women feel like, oh, my butt disappeared with pregnancy or having babies? Well, that's not a good thing. We want to work on getting those glutes back, and which can help our pelvic floor function. And we have to work on our alignment and what's going on with our rib cage and our breath and like all the things they tie back to pregnancy, absolutely for women, even like I said, women that have 30-year-olds, like it's
Hmm.
still there if we
Well,
never corrected it.
yes, I feel like childbirth is like the pregnancy, the childbirth. That's what like really just changes the whole. That's when I feel like
It
people.
can.
Well, I would say I'm sure there's people obviously that have pelvic floor issues before that, but that really exacerbates or brings attention to, or commonly after we've given birth, and it's like, oh wait, now I have all these symptoms that start, and then kind of just can get even worse throughout the years for sure.
Yeah, and it applies to women who've had C-sections because I get the question all the time. Well, Erica, my pelvic floor is fine because I had C-sections, and I'm like, that's actually not the case because you can still have pelvic floor restriction, damage, whatever it might be, just from carrying babies, from imbalances in the pelvis, like all the things we've talked about. So, yes, you don't have that vaginal birth where you may have, even more damage for some women. Yes, their pelvic floor stuff is from vaginal childbirth for sure, because of severe tearing, trauma to the pelvic floor, things like that. But even women who have C-sections can have pelvic floor dysfunction going on too.
That's good to know. And I work with a lot of people on gut health issues, optimizing digestion. So I know you mentioned that digestion can also affect the pelvic floor.
Absolutely. We could talk for hours about this, Meg, as I know you know too. But in short, basically, to understand digestion, like, so when I'm working with women on learning how to effectively strengthen her deep core or pelvic floor, I will also be sure to have her start paying attention to her digestion. A lot of women are constipated, as I know you know.
Yes,
And
yes.
when we're constipated and our bowels are backed up, we have that extra weight and pressure pushing on our pelvic floor and our abdominals and our back from inside of our body, right? So that's always the first thing is trying to work on that constipation, trying to be regular. I teach some manual stomach massage of the stomach, some light fascial ball work, and it's amazing how like it works both ways. Like we need to do the movement piece to strengthen the tissue, the abdominal wall, the pelvic floor, the spine, all of that. But again, if we're not addressing our digestion and working to decrease inflammation, it can just be a harder uphill battle than working on both simultaneously. So it's getting those bowels moving regularly as best you can. Decreasing inflammation can really, really help your pelvic floor function. I hear all the time from my ladies that when they start to that they've been working on their pelvic floor deep core, but then when they really add in the digestion perspective of it and improve their digestion, it's like it skyrockets their ability
Mhm.
to feel their pelvic floor and feel that connection through their core. And then it'll ebb and flow. And I'll also hear from women, right? Okay, like I started my period and I don't feel my connections as well. And that's just very normal. So I don't have a good solution for that part, but
Yeah.
it's temporary. It comes back.
Yes.
But because, things shift a little bit with hormones,
Mhm.
but digestion is really, really, really important. You can't
Yeah.
again, you can't just spot treat. We
It's
have to
important for
look at,
everything. That's why I'm like always like,
oh
okay,
my
your
gosh.
gut health is the foundation for basically everything because it affects
Yes.
everything else. And I think so many people are constipated, like not having that regular bowel movement and think, oh,
Yeah.
that's my norm. But just because
Yes.
that's your norm doesn't mean that's normal. And so, really
Yeah.
understanding, okay, we can and do see every day once we work on these things and optimize digestion and really address some of the underlying things that we're able to see that change. So it's
Yeah.
something that's easy to do. It's just being able to recognize that it needs to be
Yeah.
done too.
And two, if women are constipated all the time, we're stressing the pelvic floor a lot more to have to
Hmm.
go to the bathroom, right?
Yes.
So, and the other side of that too, just the whole bathroom conversation of just when you ladies go pee, again, I'm like, don't practice stopping your flow, actually practice releasing and relaxing because a lot of women do not empty their bladder all the way because
Hmm.
they're too tight. So they go pee, they think they're done, and instead they actually have to like really practice like letting go of their pelvic floor to fully make sure they are letting all of their urine out.
Okay.
And I think the same can be with bowel movements too.
Hmm.
If you're really tight and restricted, you need to make sure you're really relaxing as well, and to make sure things are coming out, because otherwise if
Hmm.
you're just gripping all the time you could actually be holding your bowels up tighter,
Up
and
too.
so it's
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, it's really, yeah, that's just being able to actually think about it and pay attention. I think sometimes, like you're saying, half the battle is just identifying, like, oh, okay, I am holding on or I am tight. And then you
Mhm.
can't make the change even until you're sometimes aware of what you're even doing functionally.
Oh yeah, awareness is the first piece. And I will just add to that is don't be hard on yourself if you recognize, like, 'cause I get women say, well, oh my gosh, I've done everything wrong my whole life. And I'm like, no, we just didn't have the education. So you just have
Hmm.
to shift it and remind yourself, like, look, I'm learning something new about my body, and be so grateful when you learn these new things and be like, okay, empower yourself and your body and your mind with the new information and just give it a go and give it a try. And you cannot make change without that awareness, but we also need to be kind to our body because otherwise that's just another hurdle we have to try to
Yes.
overcome.
Kind to your body, kind to yourself, give yourself
Yeah.
grace. I know.
Yes,
Yes,
exactly.
I'm with you there. Well, thank you. You've given us so much helpful information. Can you tell the listeners where they can find you?
Well, yeah, thank you so much, Meg. This has been so fun. Yes, you ladies can head over to my website. It's ericaziel.com. My last name is spelled Ziel. And over there, you can find more about my programs. My core rehab one is really the one you'll want to look into for pelvic floor dysfunction and healing. And then I also have a free pelvic floor guide, which is just can really give you some deeper tips from kind of what we talked about today, continuing that conversation. And so you can find that on my website as well.
Great. Well, head over there if you're someone who thinks that you actually, everyone, right? Everyone needs some of these tips. So
Yeah.
thank you so much and have a great day.